Hello, I'm joined in the studio today by Arlington's Animal Control Officer, Amanda Kennedy. Amanda, thanks for coming in to talk to us this morning.
Absolutely, happy to be here.
Given the recent small spate of rabid raccoon incidents, we wanted to ask you to give us a little bit more background about rabies. So let's start with, what is rabies?
Sure. Rabies is actually a virus, and it impacts the central nervous system in the brain. It's a really interesting disease. I know that might sound odd, but it's a smart disease and it's interesting. And one of the things that I find most interesting is how quickly an animal becomes infectious is based on where they're bit. So it's really, if you think about if they're bit on their foot, on their rear foot, it's going to take longer to move up the spinal cord and into the brain. During that time, the animal is in fact not infectious. It's the incubation period. They cannot give anybody rabies. Once it does become present in the brain, they then start to shed the virus in saliva. And at that point is when they're actually considered rabid. And if they were to bite somebody or another animal, they would be transmitting rabies. At the point that it comes into the brain, and this is pretty well documented, it's 1 to 10 days until that animal will die. That's pretty much 100%. There are no known cases of animals clearing the rabies disease once they're infected.
And are we able to, can you tell if you're looking at an animal, a rabid animal, for instance, does it look or behave in a certain way that would indicate that it is indeed rabid?
So some animals that are rabid will act in a way that we can ascertain as potentially being rabid. Some won't at all, and so that's something that's really important for people to understand. Recently I've had a lot of phone calls of people very concerned because they've seen raccoons or skunks out during the day, and there's a myth around that's abnormal and not okay, but these are not animals that are exclusively nocturnal. And they will, in fact, come out during the day, especially around this time of year. But what we're looking for when we see an animal that we would suspect it to be rabid is what I would describe as drunken behavior. So again, it's affecting the central nervous system, it's affecting the brain. It's going to affect the way the animal moves, and it's going to affect the way the animal behaves. So severe aggression is obviously one that we're all pretty familiar with. Walking and falling over repeatedly, or walking in circles, are all things that would be of high level of concern. And we would want you to call the police station for sure if you saw something like that. Interestingly enough, rabies and distemper present almost exactly the same. So when you see an animal that's doing that, we know that they're sick, we know that we need to do something about it. But unless we test that animal, we're not going to know if it was rabid or if it had distemper. Either way, that animal's suffering, and we want to euthanize it so that we can keep the public safe and also do what's best for that animal.
Right, but you wouldn't know until you can't tell, as you say, otherwise, until you actually have the animal.
Absolutely.
In your care.
And testing it, just so you understand, is something that the state does, and the state won't test an animal that is suspected of being rabid unless there was an exposure to a person or a pet.
Okay. And how is rabies spread?
So rabies is spread through a bite. Typically through a bite. As I said, it's shed in the saliva. So what you're looking for, if an animal that is rabid bites another animal or a person, they have exposed them to that rabies virus that is shedding in the saliva. Another possibility would be if the saliva came into contact with an open wound on a person or an animal. So a scratch or a cut. If that animal licked you where your cut was, then they would be able to transmit that way as well.
And how often do these kinds of incidents occur? We've just had 3 recently in a small space of time. Is that typical? How many animals per year, if you can say such a thing, might you catch that are rabid in Arlington?
Sure. So I don't have exact numbers on that. Again, because we don't test all of them. So there's the ones that I can assume were probably rabid. And I would say it would range anywhere from 50 to 100 a year. That doesn't mean that they all were, and it doesn't mean that we have them all. Again, it only takes 10 days, so once they're sick, they're going to die, and so we may miss them entirely, where they didn't interact with anybody or do anything that we saw in order to take action.
Right.
Interestingly, across the state, about roughly 450 cats and dogs are exposed to rabies every year. So that's sort of how it affects us with our own pets, and that's a place where it actually becomes really important that we vaccinate our pets so that they don't contract rabies.
Yeah, you were just mentioning that. I'm wondering if they happen to, what should we do if a loved one, a human or a pet, is bitten by a rabid or potentially rabid animal?
So I'll break it down. If it's a human, you want to immediately wash that area really well with soap and water for 10 minutes. So that's something that the Department of Public Health will reinforce, and that's really, really important. That you do that. You want to report it immediately if you can, so to the police. If the animal that bit is present, then you don't want to put yourself at further risk, but you want to make sure, if you're able to keep your eyes on it so that when myself or an officer arrives, we can do something with that animal. Once we've lost sight of it, it's not, we can still do something to help the person, but it changes whether we're able to get that diagnostic information.
Right. And is it the same with if it's a pet that is bitten?
So if it's a pet, I wouldn't recommend that you do the washing yourself. I would recommend that you then again call me, seek veterinary care. Either case, myself and the Department of Public Health needs to be notified. And in the case of an animal, that animal may go on a quarantine. And that quarantine can vary depending on whether they were up to date on their rabies vaccine or not.
Okay. So the treatment of a person or an animal who is bitten would be a little bit different. Depending on whether it's a human or an animal.
Yeah, for an animal that's up to date on its rabies vaccine, what we would do is do a booster vaccine, and then we watch them to make sure that they're not showing any signs. We don't do what's called post-exposure vaccine. For people, you would go to the hospital and you would begin a series of shots. So if you are exposed to an animal that we cannot isolate and test, or if you were exposed to an animal that did test positive, you would get a shot of immune globulin near the site wherever you were bit. So if you were bit here, it's going to be here. And then you get a series of vaccines, which are the rabies post-exposure vaccine. And that's going to go on a certain schedule. It's usually 4 to 5 shots over a series of a couple of weeks. So you go back a few times. And with that treatment, from a post-exposure perspective, there's almost 100%, being able to avoid that person having an issue. There are hardly any cases of people contracting rabies in this country. Worldwide, about 55,000 people a year contract rabies and die. Once you do get it, there really is no cure. And in this country, the average is 1 to 3 people a year. So that's
astounding.
Well, we have really good medicine, and we have really good laws and protocols, and we tell you to call us so that we can help you through that process, so we can keep those numbers low.
So for a human bitten by a potentially rabid animal, it's really more a kind of nuisance for a while in terms of following the course of treatment that you need to follow, et cetera, than it is a real concern in terms of the health longer term or otherwise of that.
I mean, I hesitate to call it a nuisance because rabies is so
Yeah,
serious,
sure.
but sure,
I'm sorry.
it's a scheduling nightmare. You have to go back for all these shots, and particularly if there's children involved, kids more than adults don't want to get shots, at least for the most part. So that definitely is a nuisance. It's important that you get treated, and if you're not sure, that you seek out help. The really cool thing, not that I would advocate for anybody to get bit for this reason, but if you do get bit and you get your post-exposure vaccines, it means you're now vaccinated for rabies, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. And I mean, basically, I think I used the wrong word in terms of nuisance, but I just want to make sure that for people who would be worried about such a thing, really there's a clear course of treatment and a dependable outcome there.
Absolutely, and you want to do that in partnership with the Department of Public Health. So the State Department of Public Health oversees that, and they work with the CDC. So occasionally the protocols for this, the timing of the shots changes. So you want to make sure that you're not only seeing your doctor, but consulting with those agencies as well. But yeah, we have a really good outcome as long as you're getting the treatment.
That makes a lot of sense. So putting rabies aside just for the moment, I think as we are moving through spring and towards summer, we hope, I imagine that this is a particularly busy time of year for you. Is that the case?
Absolutely. Spring is an extremely busy time of year for animal control officers. It's when all of the urban wildlife that we share this space with are having babies and are out looking for more food than usual, and then their babies are starting to explore and they haven't figured out all the rules, so sometimes they're doing foolish things, and and making us feel frightened or concerned. We have a lot of wildlife here in Arlington, and I just would remind everybody to make sure kids know not to approach them, not to harass them in any way yourself. Except where coyotes are concerned. As an adult, if you see a coyote, one of the best things you can do is make a lot of noise. You want to intimidate them and tell them, hey, this is my yard, you need to move along. We, here in Arlington, we're so close to, Boston, and we have so much wildlife, and that can be really neat and really exciting. We have coyotes, fox, raccoon, skunk, woodchuck. We also have some fisher cat, wonderful birds, raptors, cottontails.
Wow.
So, there's a lot of wildlife to be seen and to be respected here in this town.
And what kinds of issues do you figure you will be dealing with in the coming months? I mean, aside from the occasional rabid animal, et cetera.
Absolutely. Educating and helping residents and business owners understand the best way to coexist with wildlife, covering trash, making sure that you've secured any holes in your home, or that you don't have a inviting under your porch area. So helping residents with that, helping them understand that. In some cases, what we have animals that are hit by a car and maybe they have babies, and so I need to go and find those babies and figure out wildlife rehabber that's able to handle that.
Wow.
And so that part, that's, as somebody who loves animals, I get kind of excited about that part. I'm sad their mom died, but it's cool to cuddle babies for a short period of time until we can get them to the appropriate person.
And hopefully animal custody issues are not nearly as complicated as human custody issues can be sometimes.
Yeah, no, not when it comes to babies, not like baby raccoons or baby skunks, not as many issues there. But of course, we have to follow the Department of Fish and Wildlife guidelines. And if you do find a baby, typically we ask that you just leave it alone, but certainly feel free to call me, because I'm happy to help in any way that I can and give advice, because oftentimes mom is nearby and we just don't realize. But we have some great organizations in this state. Tufts, New England Wildlife, and Tufts both operate these fabulous wildlife rehab clinics, which are a lot of fun to go visit. So for folks with kids, it's something that you can talk to New England Wildlife about going out and doing a little tour. Well,
just to wrap up, you have mentioned already various steps that parents and others can take to safeguard their children, and just wondering if there were any general pet safety guidelines you'd like to share with the audience before we...
Yeah, this is a great time to make sure that your animals are up to date on the rabies vaccine. I cannot stress that enough. Really, go double check, make sure they're up to date. You might want to rethink about your free-roaming cats, because cats that are out on their own, are more susceptible to having an interaction with wildlife. You want to check for any kind of wounds or things like that. In terms of things that aren't related to rabies, this is a great time of year to remember that you shouldn't be leaving your pets in your vehicles. So even on a relatively cool day, your car can heat up very quickly. So it's something to maybe rethink. Maybe during the winter you've been bringing them with you to the supermarket, and this might be the time to make that shift as well. Making sure that your pets have identification is really helpful. When we come around things like fireworks and stuff like that, remembering that can be really scary for our dogs. July 4th, typically, across the country, is the time when we have the most stray dogs. So things like that are things that we can think about as we start to creep towards the summer months, which I'm looking forward to.
Well, Amanda, I really want to thank you for coming in and talking with us today. It's been chock-a-block full of useful information to talk with you, so appreciate your coming by. And we'll talk to you again at another time.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime.
Thanks. For Arlington Public News, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us.